Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Creepiest life experience.
When I was much smaller and I was still living in the small old dilapidated house in the outer suburbs of Philadelphia, my family of 4 was cleaning the couple rooms we had in the house in between smoking breaks. While everyone else was in either my mother or sister's room, I was kneeling next to the door of mine, organizing some toys I had with my back to the wall. And while listening to their talk of where to put this and how to stack that, I heard a sharp, rapid breathing behind me from a man. It was startling, not only because I was the only one in that room, and not even only because I was the only male in the house at the time, but because of how terrified I became. I quickly ran out of my room and told everyone, but my mom and aunt dismissed it as a child's imagination. I accepted this, but only a few years later I had much trouble sleeping. Whenever I closed my eyes in the typical silent darkness, loops of musical instruments would incessantly play in my head. I would lay in the bed for hours every night trying to sleep. I went to a therapist who did practically nothing but waste our money. And from there, what would eventually be diagnosed as OCD became gradually worse as the music kept going, and the fear of sickness arose as suddenly as that breath had. Now we went to a psychiatrist who actually diagnosed me and prescribed for me Zoloft, which in less than 2 weeks practically cured me of my anxiety and obsessions. I was able to sleep better now that the musical instruments had more or less left me, and the typical silent darkness actually became that. But I didn't find comfort enveloped in its blackness, but the same terror that I had experienced not a few years earlier. This time, however, I did not escape to a different part of the house. I didn't want to disturb anyone, and perhaps I didn't want to go back to any mental health professional. I had had enough of them for the last year or so wherein these events transpired. But either way, the rapid masculine breathing returned with my back to the wall. It would start with me sleeping on my right side facing the other end of the bed. As I settled down to sleep, I would begin to hear footsteps upon the carpet, and the breathing began. Then a female would start to whisper incoherently in my ear. It always started very quietly, barely noticeable in fact, but slowly started to crescendo in both intensity and volume, and my terror rose with them. Every time I attempted to ignore it, the terror I felt would reach to such a point that I simply could not take it anymore. And fearing that this time truly held some horrible entities or drug-addled intruders, I swiftly turned from this position, only to be greeted with an empty wall and the cessation of my fear's origins. I tried to experiment with different positions, but these whisperings and close-quarter breathings continued, unless both of my ears were covered. The room was lit up completely, or someone else that I trusted completely was physically there with me. Even then, another person's presence was the only true cure for this problem. Eventually, we sold the house and moved into a smaller but much more livable apartment. Our house had a mold and moisture problem, among others, which I have remained to this day for 3 years. The whispering has more or less abated, but sometimes I will still hear footsteps on the carpet, breathing through my ear, or the occasional whisper. But adulthood and a new location has granted me a less terrible reaction to these, what I will call hallucinations. Though I fear them coming back, the only truly intense experience I've had with them returning in this apartment was what I believe to have been several unfortunate conditions that arose from the cold airflow of my air conditioner and hotter air from the summer outdoors that culminated in me opening my bedroom door at 3 in the morning to be greeted by the familiar dark hallway and the all too familiar breath in my face. This time, though, I felt its hotness on my face, and scarcely a moment went by before I slammed the door shut, apparently not waking my mother, and crawling back into bed watching my cat to see if he noticed anything awry. He didn't, but that did only so much to help my paranoia. And it was the same few hours that I was once so closely acquainted with before sleep and I met once again. I sleep much better these days, thankfully. Pick only somewhat related.
When I was younger, my brothers, a couple of our cousins, and one of my older brother's friends found a cabin in the woods by a middle school. It was pretty surreal. There was a small creek that ran past it, and absolutely no noise other than the bubbling from that creek. No birds chirping or squirrels running around. Nothing. The cabin didn't have a door, so we thought it was okay to go peek inside. Maybe this was someone's elaborate clubhouse. Who the hell knows? We all are pretty hesitant to go inside since there was just this general feeling of unease in the group that grew with every step we took. We get inside and there's nothing in there but an old dirty area rug and some candles. Disappointed. We were hoping for some cool stuff to be inside for some reason. We all walk out onto the porch area when one of my cousins, Andrew, just bolts back toward the middle school. Everyone was screaming at him to stop and wait for us. A couple of my cousins chased after him as well. My brother had the sense to look around for what he was running from and just screamed, "Everybody follow Andrew! Run! Now!" None of us were about to question him since the area was creepy as hell. We all got back to the middle school confused, panting, and wondering what the hell we were running from. Andrew and his bike are gone. Apparently, he decided to just book it home as fast as possible, according to his brother. I asked my brother what the hell happened back there. He said he could see this pitch-black figure in the woods about 200 feet away in the shape of a man, sort of. It was about 7 feet tall, had unproportionally long legs, and its face had no features other than yellow glowing eyes. A couple years later, I went back to find the cabin again with a couple of friends and my other brother. He was in the original group as well, to take some pictures and hopefully scare my skeptic friends. The only problem was we couldn't find it. There was only one trail to follow. Always has been. Haven't really been a fan of the woods since.
Me and my cousins were playing flashlight tag in the Sonora desert when we suddenly found an eerie blue light, and we thought it was a decent idea to follow it. We reached some water containers and found out it was a floating goat that shone with blue light. We all just confirmed what we saw as the goat started making goat sounds, and we leave the place dumbfounded and back to my uncle's house. We really don't like talking about it given how stupid but creepy it was. I have 2 other stories, one involving an UFO floating way too low and messing with radio signals in Chiapas, and another involving a disjointed voice near my grandmother's house, but the floating goat takes the cake.
That's a cool story. I'd tell it every chance I got.
There is a strong sense of surrealism and dread. We really didn't feel well after witnessing the goat. One of my cousins even puked the next morning. It's really stupid, but we were happily playing one moment, and the next we know is that we just saw something so bizarre. It shouldn't be real yet. All of us agree it happened and really don't want to talk much about it. This happened in a ranch in the outskirts of Hermosillo, Sonora in Mexico. The place was kind of big, so it was great for fooling around in the night, and outside a coyote that got through the fences once nothing of interest really happened. So the floating goat just a few hundred of meters from the property, floating above water containers for rainfall, really creeper us out.
That's because you and your cousins were suffering from radiation sickness. Someone covered a goat in cesium to fuck with your head. It glows bright blue. There have been stories of people getting exposed to this stuff after cracking open old radiotherapy medical equipment for salvage. I don't think that's what happened here, though. Very interesting story, Anon.
That could explain how we went from playing flashlight tag to joking about ET to just dread silence and a weird feeling that we shouldn't have seen that shit. It would certainly explain why we were all quiet and feeling discomfort, and why my cousin puked his heart out in the morning when my older cousin mentioned it in the morning just to make sure he didn't imagine it. What I can't explain is why it was blue and was shining, and how the hell was it floating in circles, as if it was taking a stroll in the air over a bunch of water tanks that are supposed to be filled with rainwater and work as an emergency reservoir for drought. Let me repeat myself. The goat was floating, and the only sound we could hear was the goat making goat noises and one of us whimpering like a wuss. Kinda wish I reacted better. I basically just stood there not knowing what to do. I guess it is an entertaining story from a third-party perspective, but even thinking about it makes me feel kinda weird, almost as if I shouldn't talk about it, or if I was peeking on things one shouldn't see or talk about. But screw it. I'm a big boy now, and I can say that I saw a fucking blue-shinning floating goat if I mean it.
Did it look like it was hanging from something, a string maybe?
There was nothing on site that could support a goat weight. Outside of the water tanks, nothing close had that altitude. It was floating in semicircles around them without much of a pattern. Sometimes it kicked with its back legs and got faster, then seemingly pulled weight mid-air and slowed, then repeated it to change direction slightly. It was floaty, but it was almost as if it was prancing in the air.
That sounds too silly to be scary, tell the one with the voice.
The fact that is silly is what makes it scary. Why the hell was a goat flying in circles above some water tanks, and why it's shining, Like I said, it wasn't suspended in the air, but actually prancing similar to walking on the air, albeit slowly, almost as if it couldn't control itself well without friction. As I said, it was surreal and stupid. The voice, however, is a semi-isolated incident. It comes and goes as it pleases. Let me explain. I basically moved back to Chiapas to help my grandmother in her house. I get free rent close to my job, and I help her out with her struggle with medical needs, a simple deal. I mean, I would do it out of love, even if I didn't live there. But she gave me a room, I can't complain. Around noon at the back of our house, we can periodically hear a muffled moan, as if someone was complaining about some pain but can't articulate about it. It comes and goes, sometimes persists for about 2 hours. I got used to it and didn't pay attention. Later, I found out that the house behind ours housed a terminal cancer patient that refused to die in the hospital and rather choose to die in his house, to which his family compiled. He went almost an entire year in agony or so, I was told. A woman that previously worked in my grandmother's house confirms this event and even stood there as we both heard the moans. Our neighbors apparently have it rough since they already destroyed the old room where the man died, and the voice is still heard. They called priests, as apparently it only quiets when people pray. The bizarre thing is that these moans have been heard by a lot of people, and they are a common occurrence that we just got used to it. When we hear it, we pray for the man, and it goes silent. I have had guests in the house asking me about it, so I know it isn't an isolated incident or mass hysteria in my family. It's just something we got used to.
My brother and I have always been super into aliens and shit like that. One night, he decided to take me out for dinner since our parents were kind of being assholes and fighting a lot at the time. After dinner, we decided it was too early to go home and neither of us really wanted to be there anyway, so we drove around for a couple hours. It's about 10:45 when we decide to hit the highway and head back home. We live in a rural area, so this highway is barren, just trees on either side for miles. It's roughly a 20-minute drive to our house from where we were at. We start talking about aliens and shit when the radio starts screwing up. All we can hear is static for about 30 seconds and then a high-pitched buzzing noise. His headlights start to flicker and he says something along the lines of, "Great, I just put a new battery in this thing." He goes to pull over and that's the last thing we remember. All of a sudden, we're back on the highway, radio is fine, lights are bright, and we're driving down the same piece of highway again. He slams the brakes and just stares at the radio. I'm looking at him, just confused, assuming I had fallen asleep and had been dreaming. He asks me what time it is without moving his eyes from the clock. I told him, I don't know, 11 o'clock? Because I had looked at the clock before and it was only 10:45. So I looked at the radio to see what the fuss was about. It said 2:06. Assuming it was just a screw-up with the battery, I looked at my phone to make sure. My phone also said 2:06 a.m. We both knew exactly what happened and just stared at each other in silence for a good 30 seconds before he sped home. We've talked about it a few times since. Neither of us remembers anything outside of being in the truck. To be honest, I prefer it that way.
I have some stories, but I'm going to start with ones my dad told me. When my dad was young, he was staying the night with his grandparents. In the middle of the night, all of a sudden, his grandpa's car's headlights just come on. Grandpa tells everyone to stay inside and goes out to check. No footprints around, winter, BTW, no signs of people, no nothing. But the car is running and lights are on. When my dad was a little older, he was walking down a back road on his way to visit a friend. He randomly looks up and sees what seems to be either a gigantic bird or a flying dinosaur as it flies out of his range of vision, beyond some trees. The next day, same time, same place, he sees the same thing fly exactly the same route, as if it was a recording playing back. He believes it was a time slip of some kind. He also once had a strange dream where a being took him far out into the universe and explained complex scientific things to him. The only one his young mind understood was relative density. The being showed him a small cube and explained that it was heavier than the planet, and then showed him a supermassive, planet-sized sphere and told him he could move it with one hand. As a young teen, he was laying in the living room, felt someone watching him, and turned to look at a nearby window. There, he saw an odd-looking, older, bald guy looking in at him and smiling. Freaked him the fuck out. Later on in life, he eventually had the realization that he ended up looking like the guy he saw, so he may have been visiting himself somehow. When my grandma died, my dad knew it the instant it happened. He dreamed of her calling his name and woke up as if from a nightmare. Noted the time and found out the next day that's the exact time she died. When my dad was a teen, he used to walk 12 miles to go see my mom. It was dark most of the time when he was walking back home, and there was this one spot he hates, because the hair on the back of his neck would stand up every time he walked past it. Decades later, my best friend and I are going wannabe paranormal investigators. We hear this story, so we go up to the spot to take some pics for lulz. Probably like 40 pics. Most of them are nothing. One pic randomly has a full body mist form that's human-shaped in it. We shat bricks, both got mad chills and got the hell out of there. Put the pics on my dad's PC, but, as these things go, that was like 20 hard drives ago, and the pics are long gone. Some of mine now, always used to go out on long walks as a teen. Loved to wander in the woods too. This spot in the woods near my parents' house seemed amazing to me then, so I spent hours and hours there, almost every day. It's like my own personal world out there. Occasionally hear creepy shit, like whispering that I can't make out and people talking. Never even slightly creeped out by it. Dot never saw another living being there. Not even chipmunks or bugs, come to think of it. Fast forward 20 years, and I end up taking my son out there because why not? Well, it's such a huge place. Like, I remember all the details from when I was young, but man, the place feels 3 times larger than it used to. It's also dark as shit, in the middle of the day, and gives me the creeps to a maddening extent. My son tells me it's beautiful here, so we GTFO, and he's now banned from going there. Back when I was about 25, I'd gotten so sick that I ended up living with my parents for a few months. By the time I felt better, I had basically moved back in, sadly, and was having a hard time getting back to my own house. During this time, I slept in the front bedroom, and like 4 dogs slept on the bed with me. Little shits. I want to preface this next part by acknowledging that it's a dream, but felt totally real at the time. I got up in the middle of the night to go take a piss, walk from my temporary room through the living room, into the kitchen, look across the kitchen, and see my parents' door open and light on. Think, okay, that's weird for 2 a.m. Well, whatever. They're adults. They can do whatever they want. Continue into the small hallway connecting the kitchen and bathroom, and as I walk in, there's a mirror on my right and the bathtub on my left immediately inside the door. In the mirror, I see a faint green flicker, so I look. I wish I never did, because it freaks me out just thinking about it now. I looked in the mirror and reflected there. I see a small man in the bathtub, probably 3 or 4 feet tall and totally black, crouching there, cradling a green flame and staring at it. I turned to look in the tub and reached for the lights at the same time, and everything went totally black. I can't see at all, and I feel 1,000 hands pick me up and carry me out of the bathroom. I try to scream for help, but their hands are on my face, keeping my mouth shut. I can't breathe. Suddenly, I explode awake, back in my bed, freaking out bad. The dogs all freak too, but that's my fault. Anyway, I knew it was a dream after a while, but never went in there at night again. And ever since then, I have had recurring nightmares about a black entity trying to take control of my body away from me, accompanied by occasional sleep paralysis. Good times. You know, except for the good part. That's all for now.
16 years old at the time. Babysitting my cousins. Girl cousin, who's about 5, returns to the living room about an hour after I put her to bed. Tells me there's a man in her room. Feel myself about to shit my pants. Immediately think about calling the police. Stop myself because she's just a kid and might have had a bad dream. Grab a kitchen knife, tell her to wait and head to her room. Feels like my heart is about to explode. Slam the door open, turn on the lights and look around. Check anywhere someone could be hiding. Absolutely nothing. Return and comfort her, and tell her it was just a bad dream. She doesn't believe me. Tells me the man with red eyes was so scary she couldn't fall asleep. Apparently never experienced anything like it again. Even though it must have been a bad dream, and it's been years since, I still find it pretty spoopy.
Be me 11. 18-year-old sister has always been sort of a weirdo. Likes to hurt me and gets irritated with me easily. Remember mom and dad always yelling with her. One day, sis takes me to hang out with her boyfriend. Get to his place. It's this shit place that's totally trashed. He's this skinny tweaker covered in tattoos. They take turns making fun of me. He pushes me into a closet, and I hear them yelling at each other outside. Concern.jpg. Force me to go on a drive with them. Bring me to a really shit neighborhood. Dragging me by the arm, bringing me into an alley. There's two big dudes waiting there. One of them looks at me and just goes, "What the fuck?" Sis and her boyfriend start saying shit like, "Kids go for a lot, right? And come on, just a little bit." The really buff guy blocks their path out. Other smaller guy starts asking if this is a joke. Sis tries to run and the big dude headlocks her. Watch her struggle for a bit and just flop over. Her boyfriend pulls a knife. The smaller guy grabs his arm and the big dude starts punching the shit out of him. He manages to run away with sis. They stumble back to the car and leave me there. The dudes start asking me who I am, where they got me from. Quick rundown.exe. They look at each other really concerned. They ask me where my parents are. I don't know, I'm 11 and where am I? They bring me back to their place. They go inside a room for a second, come back out. We all get in the car. They start saying how they're really sorry about what my sis did, still don't understand. One tells me that she's a real bad person and not to listen to her anymore. Other one says that if he sees them again, I won't ever have to deal with her again. They brought me to the police. The cops asked me a bunch of questions. Dudes look really nervous at the beginning and then talk with the cops and sort of chill. They eventually leave, see them leaving, and they tell me to be safe and not to trust my sister. Mom and dad came later hugging me and crying. 2 months later, sis comes back home. She's really gaunt and has a black eye. She immediately pushes me on the ground and starts yelling how it was my fault. She grabs me and starts shaking me. Dad comes into the front room. Sis looks at him and autistic screeching.x. Dad just walks right up to her and clocks her shit right in the head. So hard I could hear a crack. She slams her head into the wall, curls up and starts crying. Hear mom in the kitchen saying something on the phone like, "They're here, they came back." Sit there while dad has his foot on sis's back. She's ranting really fast and twitching her hands around, saying how she hates all of us and how she'll cut my head off one day. A few minutes go by and see red and blue lights flashing outside. Lots of yelling. Someone slams into the door and starts breaking it open. It's her boyfriend. 2 police officers immediately tackle him and start beating him with batons. He's growling and even foaming at the mouth. His eyes are totally red and he's just looking at me. Mom takes me to my room and tells me to wait there. Hear mom and dad talking to the police. Hear mom crying. Dad comes in later. Tells me that I don't have a sister anymore. Cry.exe. Dad hugs me. Tells me he'll never let anything like that happen again. We moved to a normal suburb a few months later. Never hear from sis again. Be last month, working for a firearms manufacturer in another city. Get a call from mom telling me to come back home for a bit. Off work for the weekend. We all had a fun day catching up. They talked to me about sis for the first time ever. Say that she tried to contact them. She's apparently homeless in LA. She tried to apologize and all that good shit. But the main part of the call was her asking for money. Dad took the phone apparently and cussed her out. Descended into more death threats. They were planning on moving to a place to retire anyway, so now I'm helping them with that. On a side note, came out of the political closet to my parents. Mom cried when she learned that I'm a right-winger, had to go to another room. He still said he'd support me in all of my life decisions.
I don't believe in ghosts still to this day, but what I experienced was pretty scary. I feel like it could be something mentally, but I'm not sure. I've got 3 vivid memories. I've held on to them throughout my life and remembered them with some element of accuracy day after day. I was around 5 at the time, I usually never slept in my own bed and stayed with my mother a lot because I got scared in the attic in my room. One night, however, I woke up in my living room. Everything was pitch black, and I was in the middle of a circular carpet. The thing is, I stood up as if it was nothing and walked all the way up the stairs and back into bed as if I was in a robot mode. Another thing that happened was when I was in that same living room that I had woke up in. It was midday. I was young again, maybe around 8, and I remember from the corner of the wall, I saw a figure lean inwards and look at me as I sat on my sofa. It looked like my mother, but her face was blurry. I even called her name and then shouted it. After shouting it, my mother shouted back all the way from the kitchen, which was far from the living room, lasting, aged around 13. I was staying up really late, as I usually did. I was sitting on a small chair box while playing on my laptop. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., and I saw from the corner of my eye a black shadow. It was like something out of a movie. It had dark, ripped robes and looked as if it was just standing there in my hallway as my door was open. As I looked at it, it stayed there for no longer than a second and vanished from my vision. My heart was racing. I was almost crying, and so I just ran into my mother's room and hid there in fear. Nothing else since then has happened. I used to hear voices up until I was 16, but I don't get them anymore. I'm now 18.
You really want to know? I have a story of what I believed was a ghost. It freaked me out the whole night. I never told this to anyone. I don't understand if ghosts or spirits are real, but I saw something that freaked me out. So a few years ago, my cousin got really sick, and out of nowhere, she was in the hospital at age 22. She had some of the most intense pain, and the doctors had no idea what was wrong with her. She was religious, very religious, and involved in the Baptist church. But she got sick, so she had to be in the hospital. Everyone in the whole family went to see her, but I was a dick and selfish. I never cared about her, but I'm remembering some life lessons she taught me. Fuck, I shouldn't have made this post. Anyway, her sisters and her mom asked me to go see her, and I refused to go. I don't want to go at all, and I had other plans. They told her I would visit when you get better, and she died the next day. Family got the call. I barely cared, and just didn't seem to understand she was dead and gone. I went to work that night, working graveyard shift at some place. The lights were out in a spot, and I went for a walk at night since I wanted to take a break from graveyard shift. I was walking around, noticed an area where there was no lights on, and I saw what looked to be a girl in a white dress floating away. I still think it was my cousin, but I have no way of proving what happened or understanding what I saw. I never told this to anyone anyway, so it isn't a big deal. Just a ghost. Anyway, I also have 2 uncles who claim they saw the devil, and they changed their lives after that experience. Don't ask why I didn't go to see her in the hospital, or why I didn't even go to her funeral. My excuse for not going is probably the worst selfish thing imaginable, and I should be ashamed for not going. We never got an answer on what killed her. The doctor had no idea, and she was dead in 2 weeks after getting hospitalized. Older family members said she was an angel who had to go back. I'm serious, she was very religious and with the church. She didn't have to die in so much pain.
My house has a floor above my room. It's not exactly an attic, but my parents use it for a similar purpose. Anyway, for years I used to hear the sound of a small metal sphere rolling along the floor. I could tell it was a metal sphere because I used to have this iron ball as a kid. I used to cheat at marbles against dumb kids, and I remember rolling it on the floor of my grandma's house and it making the exact same sound. And I knew it wasn't the same ball because 1, an older kid stole it from me years before, and 2, when I went to check what the hell it was during the day, there was no such thing anywhere in the house. Even when we cleaned up that floor, my parents never found anything that could be making that sound, and as soon as night came along, there it was again rolling around and preventing me from sleeping. Sometimes it just annoyed me, but on bad days it scared the shit out of me because it felt like this sound was taunting me, trying to lure me up there and catch it in the act. It never started until I went to bed, even when I stayed up late. It only stopped when my dog died. I half expected the thing to double down now that there was no animal guarding the house, but it disappeared, and I never heard it again. I like to think it was a final parting gift from my dog, that her soul ran up there, gnawed whatever that thing was, and dragged it off to the other world where it can't bother anyone else.
Nothing supernatural has ever happened to me, but not from lack of trying. Here's what is probably the closest thing. Be me a couple of years ago, 20 or 21 years old. Get drunk with some friends at my apartment. We decided to go screw around with some ghost shit. There's this old torn-down spooky site called Hellhouse in the woods near where we live. We roll up in a couple of different cars, about 5 to 8 people. Begin the 15 to 20-minute hike and search through the forest to get to Hellhouse. The whole time, my dumbass high friend keeps saying that he can see demons flying around the abandoned houses and shit that we keep walking past. Sure, man. As we're walking, I hear this dude mumbling in Spanish. What seems like a prayer to a saint or something. Ask him what saint he's praying to make conversation. Tells me it's not a saint, but a demon that he's praying to. Okay. Finally, we reach the site, and it's literally just a basement because the building above had been torn down a few years back. Me, a couple of friends, and the dude climb down the slippery rubble that used to be stairs into the pitch-black basement area. There's occult symbols and shit all over the walls and trash littered around the floor. Dude tells us it's time to do what he came here to do. Picks up a Snickers wrapper or some shit off the ground, pulls out a Sharpie and draws some weird symbol on it. Takes out a knife, cuts his hand, and lets it bleed onto the symbol. Passes the knife to me and tells everyone to do the same. No one does it because what the fuck? Tells everyone to turn off the lights so we humor him. Starts praying in Spanish. After a while, he starts freaking out and saying he can see the Wicker Man in the corner. Dude, you know that's a Nicolas Cage movie, right? .png. Finally gets sick of his shit, and we all go back up. Later found out when he was younger, he had died for a few minutes on an operating table, but they brought him back, which started his obsession with shit like this.
Got 2. I was around 10 years old, the late 90s. Had an old portable TV, the type with the gray screen while switched off. TV is off. See something moving reflected in the screen. Sit on bed and try to focus on it. See a small, around 4 feet tall figure running around my room in the reflection, arms outstretched, like some bad zombie film. Try to identify it in the room, but there's nothing there except on the TV screen. Nope. Out of the room once I stopped freezing in terror. Second, late 2000s. Get fit quick scheme with a friend. He works late every day. We make a route through the woods that's around 10,000 steps from and to my house, in a loop. Do route every evening. One evening on the entrance to the woods, we hear something moving next to the path. Literally walk this path hundreds of times at night, and don't freak out. Assume it's an animal. Grab a fence post and hold it like a club just in case. Friend pulls out a phone, which has an awesome flashlight on it. What we see in bushes right at the side of the path is what people describe as a gray alien. Thingy is naked and looking right at us, crouched in the foliage. WTF, raise fence post. Thing runs off into the trees at pretty high speed, hardly making a sound. We walk home silently and never speak to each other again. He was a good buddy. While typing, that just reminded me of another time on the same path, which always makes it feel like something is following you. Was in a band with a couple of friends. Had gig coming up. Walking down the same path, but at the other end. Talking about what we're going to do. Hear footsteps behind us. Get to the edge of the woods and stop to see who comes out. We see at least a 9-foot-tall person in what looks like an all-black dressing gown, with a huge head literally floating down the path towards us. We all jump the fence and sprint across a farmer's field to the main road, getting covered to our knees in mud. WTF was that? Pick related is Flatwoods Monster. The last one looked very much like it.
Too many to count. Once during a manic episode, my friend that I was living with, who was a witch, suddenly had random friends over that I had never seen. When I came into the house, I heard a voice like the voice of God in my head saying, "Trust no one and play along." Loud as shit, but it was inside my head. I only half remember the night because of the episode, but the woman's name was Genie, and the guy's name was Jim, but he pronounced it like Jin. I didn't know much about Jin at the time, but I know now they are not to be fucked with. The woman told me my face was beautiful, and I said thank you. Then she told me that she wanted to peel it off and eat it. In my manicness, I responded happily and was like, "Why would you want to do that?" And she didn't respond to that. Then my witch friend had me do this weird breathing technique, and I began to experience time dilation, but time dilation I could control. Depending on how fast or slow I breathed, time would speed up or speed down. I've never been able to do it since. Shit got pretty freaky from there. We started fighting and she kicked me out of the apartment. I was banging on the door and yelling at her through the door, and during this I heard a clear, audible voice of a man telling me to be quiet, but when I looked around I saw no one. After that, the cops came and I went to the hospital. There's more to that night, but that's the gist of it. I still get shivers when I remember Genie telling me she wanted to eat my face.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.